Okay, so in today's rhythm review part 2, we're going to talk about dotted notes and tuplets. So let's start with the dotted note. So let's look at a half note, and we're still in 4/4 here, and I have an oboe. So let's look at a half note. So how long do we hold a half note in 4/4? Well, I'm sure you remember that it is 2 beats, right? So what happens if we add a dot to that? See if you can find out before I give you the answer. Well, you might be able to guess from the half rest going to a quarter rest that we added a beat, and you are correct. So first the half note and then the dotted half note. So what we're actually doing here is taking the half note and adding half of that value to it. So for instance, if we have a quarter note and then we have a dotted quarter note, we're adding half of the quarter note, which is an eighth note. So listen here, right? And this and we have to think about. So when we are thinking about the dots, you can add a dot to anything, and you can also add any number of dots to anything. So for example, I'm going to put a 7/8 measure in, and we can have a double dotted half note, and that takes up the entire 7/8 measure. So you don't really see anything more than one dot too often. You won't really see this too often. I actually use it, but I don't know of many other people that use that very often. So you're much more likely to just see one dot, and it has the same effect no matter what it is. So now let's talk about the tuplets. So we can divide a quarter note or any value into a multiple of 2. So for instance, a quarter note could be divided into here. So think back to the last video where we had that derivation where we talked about how we're dividing by 2 each time we decrease the length. Well, we can do more than that, and the way that we do it is through a tuplet. So for example, I can take this half note that I have here in blue, and I can divide that into 3 parts, and that's a triplet. So let's hear how that sounds. And we can also do the same on a quarter note. So if I put in a quarter rest here, we can also make it into a triplet. So let's start on the 3. Okay, and we can do that with other values. So for instance, sometimes you'll have a quarter note and you'll have to do it into 5, a quintuplet. So this just takes practice. There's different ways to count them. I would generally count the triplet as 1 and a. So 1 and a. That's how I generally feel. Or 3 and a, because there is no note lining up on 4 here. And none of these line up on 4. So one of the common problems that people have when they're doing a tuplet, or a triplet in particular, particularly this triplet. So I'll put that one here. So that's what it should sound like. But what many times people would do is this. So many times they take what's notated as this, and they make the mistake of actually playing it here. So I'm going to play each one separately for you to hear how they sound. So that's the actual triplet. What many times musicians do is do this. So it may sound very similar, and it is very similar, and that's why people make this mistake. But what I'm going to do is actually add another instrument so that we can hear what happens. Where's the edit instruments? So I'm actually just going to add flute. And so that I'm going to do that so that you can hear the difference. So I'm going to put the flute on a G. So let's bring that up an octave. And let's see if you can tell when they split apart. So we have both of these playing at the same time. Actually, what I want to do is I want to have one of these playing correctly. So let me put that in. So we actually want to have one of these correctly playing, and one of these incorrect, so that you can hear the difference. And you can also get a hint by looking at this. Looking at the vertical alignment, we can see that when we do this, the second note is actually a little late, and the third note is also late, and the third note's shorter. So let's hear it. So it's very close, as you could tell, and that's why so many people fall into the trap of making this mistake. So just be careful. The way that I like to avoid this is by really feeling and dividing the triplet. So for instance, let's say we have that same half note triplet. So the flute has the actual this. So what I like to do is actually feel it like this. This is how I would think of it. And I know we just talked about when not to use ties, but thinking about it this way and dividing it helps you get the notes on the right spot. And as you'll hear, you can't tell any difference. It's exactly the same. So that's how I like to think of it. And clearly you can think of it in your own way. But that's how I would think of it. Now I finally want to finish this by talking a little bit about what the actual difference between say 6/8 and 3/4 is, just because it kind of plays into this. So at first we could get a hint maybe from the stems. So for instance, what do you see is different between these? And what do you hear in the metronome? Well, you hear that we feel the 6/8 in 1 2 3 4 5 6, and we hear the 3/4 in 1 2 1 2 1 2. So what we're actually thinking about here is that it's almost like this is a triplet. And so there's another time that you use a tuplet here, and it's when you're actually trying to, instead of doing this, you actually would have a tuplet here, like that. So you'll actually use the second notation is considered correct, and this is considered incorrect. And this was a mistake that I did not understand when I first started music theory. So you can hear that they sound exactly the same, but you actually would commonly see this. And that's because that we're in groupings of 3 and 6/8, and we're going to talk more about the different types of meters in the future. So I'm pretty sure that should conclude our rhythm review, and I think we're pretty ready to start getting into actual content, new content, music theory, and I hope you'll stick around.